Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Brown Girl Green. I'm Christy Drutman, and I interview environmental leaders and advocates about diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as creative solutions to the climate crisis. I'm working to change the image of what it means to be an environmentalist in the 21st century. And I'm really excited for our topic today because we are going to talk all things bees, which is something that I don't really talk about a lot on this show, but is something that I think many people know about. Save the Bees is something that I think has made it into mainstream discussion at some point when we think about the environment. And so I've always wanted to cover this topic, but wasn't sure exactly the angle I wanted to take it in, especially because I think conservation doesn't necessarily have the most diverse history. And so when I learned about this organization you're about to learn more about, I was really excited because not only are they talking about bees, they love bees, but they also care a lot about equity, inclusion, and justice. And, that made me raise my eyebrows a little bit because I really want to learn a way to combine my passions for both nature conservation and protecting, biodiversity while also benefiting communities. And this organization does both of those seamlessly. So I would love for our guests to introduce themselves today. So Guillermo, if you can go ahead and talk about who you are, what you do, and what brings you to the Brown Girl Green Show today, that would be great.
Thank you. So first off, Christy, thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this topic, which I think is a very important one, which is about the intersection of uh, uh, diversity and environmentalism. My name is Guillermo Fernandez, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Bee Conservancy. Um, I started beekeeping actually about 11 years ago. At the time, there was a lot of press on something called colony collapse disorder. And, we're all going through our own pandemic now with COVID-19. And at the time, that was a pandemic that bees were experiencing globally as well. And what was happening were millions of bees around the world were just disappearing. Beekeepers would come back to the hive, and nearly all of their bees would be gone, and they wouldn't find their bodies anywhere. And to this day, it's still a mystery. Nobody knows what's happening. If it's pesticides, if it's habitat issues. But I had read an article that talked about individual beekeepers being the folks that could actually help honeybee colonies survive or honeybees survive as a species. So I became a beekeeper. And in that process, I realized that beekeeping was actually pretty expensive. And I met a lot of people that worked in community farms, mostly in low-income neighborhoods, and they were very passionate about growing food for their local communities, making sure that everybody had access to, in most of the cases, organic fruits and vegetables. And so I would talk to them and share, if you have a beehive in your garden, you can actually double the amount of food you're providing to your community. And these folks were interested until they saw how expensive it is to purchase a beehive, and also the work behind maintaining a beehive. You really need a beekeeper checking it regularly. So I grew up in one of these neighborhoods. My family was an immigrant family. We didn't grow up with a lot. I grew up in an area outside New York City, a city called Yonkers, and I grew up in what's a food desert. We didn't have any organic food nearby. We didn't have a lot of fresh vegetables. There was a lot of fast food places, So when I heard that these same organizations in neighborhoods like the one I grew up in couldn't afford beehives, I started the Honeybee Conservancy to provide grants of honeybee hives and bees and provide beekeeping services. And over the years, I learned that honeybees are actually only six of 40,000 bee species in the world. And a lot of those bee species actually are critical for the food we grow, especially here in the States. There are a lot of solitary native bees. Some of them we know, like bumblebees, they're like the teddy bear of the bee world. You really need them for not potatoes, for tomatoes. And there's also a squash bee that you really need to grow cucumbers and other squash. because they're specially adapted to pollinate those. So as a result, in an effort to support all bees and support food justice in all communities with this diversity of bees, we changed our name to the Bee Conservancy. I'm looking forward to questions about bees because I could talk about bees all day. So.
No, that's great. Well, thank you for providing your background. And for people who may have questions, please put them in the Ask a Question box or in the chat, and we'll see if we can get to those later on in the discussion. Well, yeah, I just wanted to start off by saying that I think it's important that you identified that there was a gap in who could um, get access to this work, but then saw that like there was all these long-term benefits that marginalized communities could have if they had access to these resources. And so yeah, I wanted to know more about with your organization, like what are some of like the services or I guess you could say like programs that you offer to help local communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So our nonprofit, we're dedicated to protecting bees. That's part of our mission, as well as safeguarding the environment, because a lot of communities, especially communities of color, are located in areas that just don't have this type of biodiversity that other neighborhoods may have. We are also very focused on food justice, as I mentioned. And we do this, some of our programming is around education. So we like to educate people, whether they're children or adults, on the diversity of bees. We also focus on research. So there's a lot of research on honeybees because they are used for agricultural purposes primarily. But there isn't a lot of research on native bees, but they're
Mm.
also a critical species of bees. So we have hosted and plan to host in the future something called a bee blitz. And it's kind of like a census of bees. Super easy. We're going to invite people to use their camera to take photos of bees in their local neighborhood. It could be in your backyard, a local
Hmm.
park. Maybe there's a flourishing sidewalk that you want to photograph the bees at and upload it to a database. And that's going to provide data to researchers. So I mentioned
Wow.
education, research, habitat creation is critical. So if we could all plant pollinator patches or bee gardens, that would go a long way because that's one of the main issues impacting all bees and pollinators in general. And we also advocate for bees. So, there have been instances where we've been able to not only participate in important events like this, but we're looking forward to working with other groups that are trying to advocate through judicial means to make sure that, let's say there isn't pesticide spraying in public parks or things like that. So,
Yeah. So could for people who don't know, like what do bees provide to obviously with agriculture, but like on like a local scale, if you could teach the audience about that, like what why are they such a keystone in our local ecosystems?
absolutely. So, a lot of people don't realize that 1 in 3 bites of food we eat actually depends on bee pollination. And there are some of our favorite foods that would completely disappear without bees. So, almonds are all the trends right now, almond milk, almond in your granola. Those would 100% disappear. Those are completely dependent on bee pollination.
Well,
I love blueberries, I like strawberries. 90% of those crops would disappear. Huge amount of crops require bee pollination. So that's why it's so important to have, in my opinion, native bees and or honeybees in community gardens, food bank gardens to increase crop yield. Because
wow.
each fruit is, I mean, it's kind of like alchemy. What a bee does is it through pollination transforms a flower into fruit. Um, so, bees are really critical for urban agriculture and also local agriculture. If you want local food, you really need local bees.
Wow.
And a lot of our, as I said, a lot of our favorite crops really depend on them. Bees, tomatoes and cranberries depend on native bees. Um, and for that reason, that's one of the reasons that we actually have a program called Sponsor a Hive. And Sponsor a Hive is a program by which we provide native bee houses and also native bee houses this year, but historically we've provided honeybee hives across the US and Canada. And the goal is to empower underserved communities to really grow their own food, to bolster the local ecology, and to really protect this vital keystone species. Because in addition to the agricultural needs, we have to have bees. We also need bees for ecological diversity. A lot of our native plants would not blossom without native bees. So by placing these native bee houses around the US, we're able to support local environments, local biodiversity, and also local agriculture. And if I could mention, there's a really cool thing about these bee houses, which is that they're not like the ones that you find at stores. We've done a lot of research behind them to make sure that the house has invited diversity of bees. So we also have those bee houses built by an organization in Brooklyn, New York, called Brooklyn Woods. And what they do is they train unemployed and local income New Yorkers in woodworking skills.
Wow.
And so these folks, promising woodworkers, are building these bee houses, and it's supporting a green economy, which is amazing. And we're only using Forest Stewardship Council wood. It's sustainably sourced wood. So, I'm really excited about how we're not only providing these bee houses to support local agriculture, but also supporting a green economy and really tying it back to sustainability through the wood.
That's so cool. I mean, building off of that, I think, when we're thinking about food justice as a concept, which basically means like who gets access to healthy food in an equitable manner. I think a big issue is, food deserts where, low income communities don't have access to a grocery store or to fresh produce. So I'm just wondering, like, why do you think programs like the one that you just mentioned are really beneficial in cultivating greater food justice in local communities?
I think that it not only helps produce more food, but also, it connects people to the land. So in a lot of these areas, they don't have as much green space as some more affluent areas might. And it's an opportunity for people to, address what's now called nature deficit disorder. So if everybody knows, and due to COVID-19, people really needed to get out of their house. I did that also. I would go to my local park. I would spend more time in nature. It has not only physical benefits, but also mental benefits. In a lot of underserved communities, they don't have as much access to green space. So by having the houses in the parks, or in these farms and green spaces, it's helping the agriculture. But also in the places where we place the houses, they're used as an educational resource. So they're a magnet for education. A lot of people will walk up to the house and learn about the diversity of bees. There's a lot of information that is out there on how to engage communities, especially school children, with bees. We have a lot of lesson plans that we provide to teachers and educational resources that help children learn about the diversity of bees and how to identify them. So I think in a lot of these neighborhoods, there's really a need for more green spaces, biodiversity, and also just being more in touch with the winged neighbors that you're sharing your space with. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's also an important thing that you brought up earlier, that it allows people to have access to green space, because I think we've seen all over the country today, like, there are certain neighborhoods, specifically like Black, Indigenous, and people of color neighborhoods, that don't have as much access to land in that way to cultivate their own food. So it's interesting coming up with these ideas of like these like micro ecosystems in your neighborhood, to be able to teach people that, you can be self-sufficient, and learn how to get more in touch with your winged neighbors, as you were saying. So I love that. I'm wondering if, like, why did you all pick this approach to specifically like bring it to underserved communities? If you could elaborate a bit more on that. I know obviously it comes from, your own background a little bit, but I would love if like, when you were building out this programming, why did you think that this would be so beneficial?
Yeah, as you mentioned, like a lot of it has to do with, my personal story because I just saw a need from based on my upbringing. But also we initially started by creating some information. This was 10, 11 years ago, for teachers, and a lot of teachers were asking for information that they could incorporate into their lesson plans, and also, asking, could I have a beehive on my school property so that it's easier for me to incorporate bees into my pollination lesson plans. So, and as I mentioned, the community gardens, I had spoken with a lot of community garden folks that were interested in possibly having a hive, but then were dissuaded by the price. Um, so yeah, I don't. So those are like some of the factors that went into us creating the sponsor hive program, and then over the years we just got more feedback from the folks that we had donated bee houses and hives to. A lot more questions about native bee houses and native bees, and so we saw that as an opportunity to share more education about the diversity of bee species and how critical they are. Um, so, as I mentioned, one of our goals is to create educational materials that teach people about the importance of bees and the vital role they really play in our ecosystem.
As we were talking about earlier, you also said that there's ways for people to grow plants in their own neighborhoods and their local areas. Could you explain more about what people in their everyday households could do to help native bee populations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that growing or creating a local pollinator patch is incredibly helpful because there are a lot of small native bees that don't fly very far. So a small pollinator patch may be their entire world. So I would look into native plants, and those can be planted in backyards or front yards or even sidewalks. Some other things that people can do is to support your local beekeeper. It's a great way to support a local business person, a green business person, because most of these beekeepers, well, all of these beekeepers are very invested in their honeybees and are great advocates also for native bees. So I recommend getting local honey. You can also get, maybe some beeswax candles. They usually have great lip balm. There's some great products you can get from your local beekeeper. Um, and those are the main things, as well as not, using chemical pesticides in your gardens, and looking to see if your city does, because a number of cities like Seattle and some states like Maryland have banned pesticides on public land. So you could get involved with ensuring that your location is not using pesticides.
That's great. And just in terms of like educating people about green jobs and what beekeeping like will hold for the future. Like, why are programs like Adopt a Hive so like vital in this like green jobs transition? Also, a quick plug for you to also talk about the benefits of the Adopt a Hive program and why people should get involved.
Absolutely. So a lot of, well, some beekeeping equipment is produced abroad, and so sometimes it's not very clear if they're used or if they're farmed sustainably from trees. So I think one of the benefits of buying things or beehives or bee homes that are sourced locally is you're able to do some background checking and just make sure that you're using sustainably sourced wood, that you're using wood that does not have that's not painted on or doesn't have any varnishes that could actually give off a chemical that could even potentially kill the bees that move in. So those are some benefits of doing that, and by doing that, you're also supporting a green economy. And of course, it'd be great if the bee houses or the hives are sourced locally. In our case, we feel very strongly about supporting the move to a green economy here in the US and in North America. So we partnered with Brooklyn Woods, as I mentioned earlier, and Brooklyn Woods is training low income and unemployed folks to become these fantastic woodworkers. And so we have these amazing hexagon shaped native bee houses that are built by Brooklyn Woods, and we are giving out 500 of them across the US and Canada. So if you're a school, if you are a nonprofit organization like a food bank and have a farm, if you are a public park, please visit sponsor thebeeconservancy.org and you will find a link to our Sponsor Hive program. Our applications are open until April 30th, and so we're eager to receive applications from other groups that are also interested in biodiversity and food justice and environmental sustainability in their market.
So cool. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for providing all that information. If the folks from the Bee Conservancy want to put that link in the chat, that would be great. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. Someone in the audience asks, in educating on pollinators and getting people into the fold of the conversation, what do you feel is the most important bit of information that gets people the most excited?
You know, there's so many bits of information that I think get people excited because bees are really fascinating. The fact that they actually speak, they communicate through smell, they communicate through dance and sound is something that interests people. But I think something that surprises people is actually there are two facts I'm thinking of. The one that the fact that 1 in 3 bites of food we eat really depends on bees. So without knowing it, we're consuming a lot of food that we benefit from thanks to bee pollination. Um, and the second fact that I think people find interesting is that there's so many types of bee species around the world. There are 40,000. Just in North America alone, there are 4,000 native bee species. Now, unfortunately, there's research that shows that 1 in 4 native bee species are heading towards extinction. A lot of bumblebee species are heading towards extinction, and there's a variety of reasons for that. There's habitat loss, there is pesticide use, um, there is also a lot of pests and illnesses that have been introduced, and those factors are resulting in these pollinator declines. So, we have an opportunity to help them at the very least by planting habitat. So, knowing facts like that are some of the things that actually intrigue people and get them asking more questions, and in some cases, more interested in learning how they can support bee populations.
Cool. Yeah, I love that question. And I mean, I think the thing that gets me excited about it is just that, like, it gives people a very tangible way to, like, reconnect with nature. Because obviously, people know about taking care of plants or gardening, but I don't think people really think about like the insect populations or like, the biodiversity in their own area. And so I think it's an interesting thing as a teaching tool to get people to just kind of open their eyes. Like for me, so I'm not necessarily like a bee person. I'm a bird person. So like I nerd out about birds, but the bees are welcome too. But it's a similar thing for me where I go out and I do local bird watching, and it makes me so excited about just like being in my neighborhood because it's something anyone could do. And I think bee populations and getting to grow your own plants in an area to benefit that in whatever capacity or land you have available. I mean, it's another way to like tap in and just like recognize the impact that you're directly making on your local ecosystem. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and actually something that brings it to life is, going back to the fact that 1 in 3 bites of food we eat are dependent on bees. There was actually a U.S. Agricultural Committee meeting on what would happen if we lost all our bees, and the result was that they believe that our food prices would increase 10 times. And of course, that's going to disproportionately impact low income neighborhoods, and many of which are populated by BIPOC. So, we really need bees. We really need bees for ecological diversity, but also our food because this increase in prices would impact minority communities the most. in fact, there are some parts of the world in China, there's a province that's known as the pear capital of the world because they grow so many pears and they have overused pesticides to the point where now they have to hand pollinate pear flowers in order to get the flower to turn into a fruit. So there are some dramatic images of people climbing trees with these little Q-tip looking devices, taking pollen from one pear flower and putting it to the other. And this is a very laborious process. This is a process that you can accomplish with bees very easily, but now people have to step in because of the widespread pesticide use. So
So if you get
it's
rid of the
really
bee, so if you get rid of the bees, you're gonna become the bee. That's the main message.
yeah, absolutely. And there are 41 million people in America that are food insecure.
Yeah.
So I really believe that by adding native bee homes and beehives to a lot of these community farms, we can address that issue.
Yeah, no, that's great. Um, yeah, no, thank you so much. I guess my last question is, um, we have a statement actually. This is cool. So someone in the audience is from the Philippines, and they are helping a children's museum that has been closed during the pandemic. Um, they now decided to welcome bees. They have 5 colonies and have harvested their first honey harvest last week. Um, oh, Tasha is part of Kids for Kids in the Philippines, and they want to know, would your foundation be able to help us with educational material for children?
Yeah, we actually have some on our website, which is the beeconservancy.org. We have some documents there that provide pollinator education that teachers can use to provide pollinator education for kids. And we have more coming up later this year. And congratulations on your first honey extraction. It's really kind of major to not only get your bees, but then at the end of the year, to be able to extract honey. And actually, one of the questions I get from people a lot is it okay that we're taking honey from bees? Like, shouldn't we leave that? Maybe we're stealing it. And the fact is, bees are so industrious. They've inspired uh, humanity for so long with the way they structure their society. But bees are so industrious that they overproduce honey, and beekeepers only take the surplus. So we always leave the majority. Bees come first, they get the first amount of honey, which is usually like 30 to 50 pounds. And then anything over that, beekeepers typically will take because the reason the honey is actually created is so bees can actually survive the winter or just have a resource. It's their cupboard. So they will produce honey so that they can, if there's a rainy day, they can just eat the honey or something for over the winter. So
I never knew that. That's interesting. Um, so another question we got is there anything we can do to promote bee populations if we live in an urban neighborhood? You kind of touched on this, but are there some specific things that, like, let's say you live in like an apartment and you literally don't have access to like a local community garden or things like that? Like, what could you do like on your windowsill? Like, is there anything you can do on a very small scale, or just anything people can think about to get involved if you don't have access to like expansive land?
yeah, I think number one, you could advocate for bees. You can either, try to get your community to plant more flowers, to not use pesticides, to support local beekeepers. Also, you can support local beekeepers. There's power in that dollar bill or that $5 bill. So make sure that if you're buying, honey or other products from the hive, that it's coming from a local business, a local beekeeper. And if you have a windowsill, definitely plant some flowers. I actually have a neighbor 3 blocks away. I met her at an event and she said, "Hey, I have some windowsill gardens and I have, she's like on the 10th floor of a building and she just planted some flowers on her window deck and she said, I have all these bees showing up, these honeybees." And I was like, "That's so funny. I have an apiary 2 blocks from your house. So thank you for planting more those flowers. Please plant more." So, those windowsills really do have an impact.
Wow. I'm like, I need to get on this. I'm so bad with gardening. But anyways, that's another story for another episode. But Yeah, no, thank you so much for just being so passionate, especially about this topic. I think I haven't had anyone on my show yet talk about bees, and I think it's such a critical conversation. I'm so glad that you were the one to share it because, you even have bees on your shirt. I didn't even notice that until like halfway through, and I was like, wow, what a vibe. So, anyways, is there any other last calls to action or things that you want to leave the audience with to stay in touch with you? Yeah, or any advice about local conservation? Just any words of wisdom to part the audience with.
Yeah, I do encourage people to visit our site because it provides some valuable information about bees. One fact I didn't mention is that actually 70% of these 4,000 North American bee species live in the ground. So if you have a garden, you definitely want to leave part of it wild and untouched so that these bees that live in the ground have an undisturbed location to thrive in. And our website has some information like that. It also has the sponsor Hive link. And we also have a newsletter in which we share events. So we have webinars, we have a lot of events that people can sign up for to learn more about what they can do to advance sustainability, to support local communities, support food justice and education. So, and our website is the beeconservancy.org.
Cool. Thank you so much for attending this week's episode of Brown Girl Green. I'm so grateful that you came, Guillermo, and joined our audience and shared your passion for bees. I'm sure it left the audience buzzing. I had to leave all the bee puns in there at the end. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining another episode of Brown Girl Green, where I interview environmental leaders and advocates about creative solutions to the climate crisis. And we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.